Okay, we are learning as a schus for Shleima for Ilana Chaya Bas Serach. I think we're on Memches Amud Aleph by the second Mishnah toward the bottom, middle of the wide lines. Sounds right?
Yes.
Select the Mishnah. Ezu Asherah. We went through our sequence of the three Mishnayos, talking about the how are you mavatel a house and a stone and a Asherah tree. Now the Mishnah says, Ezu Asherah. What is an Asherah that the Torah said is also? Kol sheyesh tachtea avodas kechavim. Anything that has underneath it an avodah zara. Rav Shimon disagrees. He says, Kol she'oivin saw. He says it's not enough that there's an avodah zara underneath it. That does not make it de facto just because it's a mishamish to the avodah zara. That's not enough to make it itself into avodah zara. You have to, the person has to be over the tree itself. Obviously, we're not talking over here about where someone planted it l'shem avodah zara. Talking about where he was doing it later, and we're going according to those man da'amrim who say not to saif abd. So Rav Shimon says it's not enough that you place you put underneath it an avodah zara. You have to be over the tree itself. That there was a story in Tzidon that there was a tree that they were over. And they found, that means over here, in this case, we say, Shahayu Oivdim, meaning that they were bowing down toward the tree. But they weren't sure what their intentions were in bowing down. They found underneath it a mound. Go check the mound. They went into it and they found inside of it a getchka, a picture of something like we've been discussing at the beginning of this parak. He found a getchka inside the mound. They were bowing down, according to Rav Shimon, like we said, you have to bow down bedafka to the tree. So he said, in this case, check it, and it turned out that they weren't bowing down to the tree, they were bowing down to what was underneath the tree, and therefore the tree did not become an Asherah. Zok the Gemara, Ezu Asherah? What's the Mishnah's question? What's an Asherah? Vanan shleish Asherah is not. We just had the previous Mishnah. We gave examples of what an Asherah is. Hachikam, Shtayim l'divrei hakol. The first two things that we said in the Mishnah, meaning that a tree that was planted originally to be an avodas kechavim, it's awesome. And if you pruned it and trimmed it for avodah zara, and then it grew, that becomes awesome. Those everyone agreed that we're agreeing on. But the last one which talked about hamid tachtei avodas kechavim and not laharezim muteres, there is a machlokes in that. And that's what our Mishnah is saying, the machlokes on the last part of the previous Mishnah. The Shimon Rabban. Ezu Asherish and Echel Shimon Rabchachamim, Kol Sheyesh Tachtei Avodas Kechavim. Whenever there's a Avodas Kechavim underneath it, Shimon Ayim Kol Sheavdei Oisai Ezu Kol Sheavdei Sheavdei Meister. Shimon says the Chavim said anything that's underneath it, and the Shimon says you have to bedavka be ovid the tree itself. Ezu hi Asherah stam. Now the Gemara asks us another question: what designates something as an Asherah? Amarav kol shekoimim yoshim tachtel ve'ein toyam miperesa. Anytime you have the galachim, the priests of this avodah zara sitting underneath it, and they abstain from partaking of the fruit of the tree, so they're not just sitting under for shade; they're being oived it. So the fact that they won't eat it, that indicates to us that they're worshiping it. Ushmola mafilu amri hani tarmi levei nitzarfi. Even if they say take these dates and send them to the Bei Nitzarfi, which is Rashi says, they bring it to their avodas kechavim, it's awesome. The Ram be shecher v'sasal eBiyam idam, because even those dates that they're sending away, They're planning to drink it on their holiday. Even though we said it's identified in Asher, and the fact that it's not used, since these are being used only as part of the Avodah Zara, they're makel on themselves to allow it to be used.
So what Rav is saying, Shmuel is saying that you don't have to. He's arguing on Rav, or it's a caveat. Like what's he?
No, it's a machlokes, as you're going to see in a second. The Gemara is going to say Hilchos Shmuel. I don't know if he's arguing. I think he's saying a limitation, and then the Gemara is going to say that halacha is taka like this limitation. Let me see. I'll see if Rashi says anything. Gemara doesn't clarify, but the halacha is like Shmuel. Whether he's just clarifying or arguing, the Gemara is going to say in a second. The halacha is like. They say taka the halacha is like Shmuel. Zok the Mishnah. Lo yeshev b'tzila. One should not sit under the shade of an asherah, of an avodah zarah tree. Then yashav, if he does sit there tar, he remains tar. As we're going to see later on in the Gemara, when someone sits underneath an oil with takrayvas avodah zarah, something that was brought as a carbon for avodah zarah, that has a din tumah. I think we had this earlier in the Masechta, zivchei mesim, that there's a zushtel between what a carbon brought to avodah zarah and a mace. I think it's only a smachta and a takanos chachamim, but there's a din of tumah. But going in the shade of a asherah, you're not allowed to sit there because you're not allowed to get hana from it. But if you do sit in the shade, you're going to be tar. As the Gemara is going to explain, it's going to be clear. This is not talking about sitting directly underneath it. Well, we'll see. The Gemara will explain exactly what it means. Not only should you not sit underneath its shade, you shouldn't pass underneath it. And if he did pass underneath the actual branches, then he's tameh. The Gemara is going to explain why he's tameh. If the tree extended into the Rishus Harabim, so that means it's not a tree that was, the Goyim decided to plant a tree on their church property, and then the tree extended over the Rishus Harabim against the Jews' will. And he went underneath it tar, the Chum were not geyser in that instance. So the Gemara is going to explain where this comes from. Chum were not geyser because we don't allow the Goyim to dictate on the Rishus Harabim of Yidden to make people unable to pass underneath. Zok the Gemara. The first thing we said, lo yeshe b'tzila. We said you're not allowed to sit underneath the shade of a asherah tree, avodah zarah. So pshita, that's pashut. We know you're not allowed to be nana from avodah zarah. This is something that they worship. Amar Baruch Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yechon, lo nitzukah l'tzel tzila. We're not talking about directly under the tree. We're talking about its shade when it's going to the side. He says it's not only is it not talking about the shade that it comes from the side, but it's talking about tzel tzila, which is the extended shade, which Rashi describes as when the tree casts a shadow more than its own height. When the sun is so low that it casts a shadow more than the height of the tree, that is called tzel tzila, and that's a very light shade. So we're saying even on that, lo yeshe b'tzila, you shouldn't be nana in the sun to get shaded from the tree. The Rashi says because it doesn't provide so much shade. I would have said because by the time the sun is that low, it's not usually that hot. Sun is not so, but maybe I'm wrong. The Gemara says, I'll make a diak. The second part of him, Yashav Tar, it's talking about the same thing, but Tzel Tzila. It's mashma that even though you didn't sit under the tree, somehow you become tameh. So the Gemara, loy, dafilu tzel kamasa nami im yashav tar. The Gemara says no, because it's not true. The only time you become tamei is if you're directly under the tree. You have to be in the oil. So why does it say b'tzeil tzila? It's going to tell you, but as far as the shade, even if it's tzeil tzila, even if it's a light shadow, you shouldn't sit under it. Even that's considered hama. Some have this discussion on the second part of that phrase. Yashav tar said if he sits, he's tar. We said yeshiv b'tzila. We said in its shade. Pshita, of course you're tar. You're not underneath the tree. You're not directly in the oil. It's coming to tell you even not just the tzeil that's far away, but even the nearby tzeil. And it's telling you that you're still tar. Now I don't really understand why one would have thought you should be tamei on that either. I think that this is Rashi. I think Taisus has problems with this. Anyway, but the Gemara asks, that's mashma that it's coming to tell you l'tzel kaimasa, but l'tzel tzila you could even l'chatchila sit in its shade. How could that be? You're benefiting somewhat from the shade. Zak the Gemara, what's this? Aleph, sorry. Afilu l'chatchila yeshiv lo. Hakamash malon afilu l'tzel kamasa im yeshiv tar. It's not telling you that. It's telling you legabe that even in the middle shade, the part that's not very far out, that you don't have to worry that if you sit under it, you might become tamei. That means the Mefarshim explain that one might have thought it's all gzeras hakasa. Maybe the Chum Geyser, even when you're not directly underneath, this tumah should apply as a gzera to keep you away from it. We say he shouldn't pass underneath the actual branches of an asher, and if he does, he's tamei. Like we said, it's Takanas Chachamim. My time, what's going on? The reason is because generally, when there's a tree that's used for Avoda Zara, they would bury underneath it the remains of their sacrifices. So when they would sacrifice something, they would bury it under the tree, and that would be underneath the tree, and the tree would then be mile on the takrevus of Yechavim, which does provide tumah. So Gemara money, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseiri. This is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseiri, the time Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseiri. Omer, minayin l'takrevus of Yechavim shemetame ba'oil. What do we see? The takrevus of Yechavim is metame oil shenemar beyitzmedu l'bal pa'or va'yochlu zivchei mesim. Ma meis metame oil after takrevus of Yechavim metame ba'oil. We learn from zivchei mesim that they said that they were ovid Baal Pa'ar in the disgusting way that they were ovid for Baal Pa'ar. And then it says Vayochlu zivchei mesim, they ate karbonis that were mace. So there's a tushtel between a carbon that was brought for Avodah Zara lahavdil and a mace to tell you that there's a din mace. Again, this is all takanas chacham, and this is an asmach to biyam. So that's why we have the questions of how it applies. Zok the Gemara. If the branches of this Asherah intruded onto the Rosh Hashanah, someone walks underneath it, they're tar. Iboilu, avar, oy over. Are we saying if he passes under it, he's tar, oy over? Are we saying, or does it mean to say, the Lashon clearly was avar, but does it mean to say that one can even l'chatchila be over? Is he have the right to pass underneath it? He doesn't have to avoid it. He says, yeah, you could look at Chila go underneath. He says that it's not im over that he can do it. If he passed by, then he's tar. The one says it's not really a machlekes. That which we said that it's avar, that if he did so, he's tar. That's if there was another way he could have gone to avoid going under the tree that went through the public with takrevus avik Yechavim, then he should do so. But if he nevertheless goes underneath it, he's going to remain tar b'di'evet. But if there's no other way, then he can even lechatchila go underneath. Amar Rav Sheshes l'shami ki matas lahasam aritani. He said, Rav Sheshes told his shamish, when we get to this spot where I know that there is a Asherah tree that goes into Rosh Hashanah, let's run. I want to run through it quickly. If there's no other way to go, Mishra Shari. We just said that it's mutter to go underneath it. So why does he have to rush? If there's another way, why would he be going through by rushing? He should go around the other way. So since he's an Adam Choshev, it's a strange halacha. Like, so what is he accomplishing by rushing? I guess he was saying that I have to go through. Adam Chashav, it doesn't become usher to him to go when there's no other way. He doesn't have to not go wherever it was he was going, but it is it's incumbent on him to rush to minimize the I guess the marasayin of people looking at it. They'll think that it's mutter. Zak the mission. Zoirin tachtea yirakas moisak shaman. Avol be moisacham. We had this mission before. You can plant underneath an Asherah tree vegetables during the winter months, but not during the summer. During the summer, vegetables need shade. So if you go underneath the Asherah tree, you're benefiting from the Asherah tree. You're not allowed to benefit from the Asherah tree, so therefore you can't do that. But during the winter, there's not so much sun, and not only that, the Gemara is going to say later on that it's a detriment for the vegetables to be under a tree. It needs as much sun as possible. So then you could put it under the Asherah tree. You're not benefiting from the Asherah tree. It has nothing really to do with it. I'm not sure how this works with I guess you become Tomei when you maybe get Goyim to get it. Or listen, you're allowed to become Tomei. We saw that the Chaverim used to be very makbid to try to avoid Tumah. But we said that you have to be Chayshish for Takreves Avik Yichavim underneath an Asherah. In any case, but during Yemais, we're saying during Yemais Hakshamim that it's mutter. And the Mishnah continues. Chazirin is spring mix, different types of greens. Those are very delicate, so they need shade. They need very little sun, and even during the winter, they benefit from having the Asherah on top of it. So it's us. Rabbi Yossi says you can't even plant your Yerakas underneath the tree during the winter, not because of the shade provided by the tree, but like we saw in the earlier Garam, because the leaves will fall down on it, they'll turn into mulch, and they'll fertilize the vegetables underneath it, and you're benefiting in that way from the tree. Zok to Gemara. Remember that Rabbi Yossi Sav Zev is a Goyim Aser was saying that according to Rabbi Yossi, it would be Aser to plant your vegetables under the tree, even though it's not benefiting from the shade, so which would be a pure benefit. I mean, it's a little hard. I have some cheshbon problems. So I'll just say what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying that if Rabbi Yossi holds that it's also because of the fertilization that comes down, so this is getting some of its fertilization from those leaves that fall down, and some of it is coming from the fertile soil. A lot of its fertilization comes from a different. So I guess in this case, in that miktsaya, like it's almost like this is going to be a machlekes, whether what we're going to be talking about for the next amud or so, amud and a half, is this zev garden, when you have something that's beneficial mixed in with something that's aser. It's partially benefiting from something aser and partially from something that's mutter. So in this case, what's allowed is the soil, the earth that provides fertilization, but the tree provides also fertilization. So Rabbi Yossi, who's saying it's also, seems to say zev geirim. If you have one mutter thing and one aser thing that's being geirim, that's causing that it's aser. I would say though, if you didn't have, if you weren't worried about the fertilizer, so why don't you say that the you still have a zev as gairim, because let's say the tree is providing shade, and that's we said in the beginning of the mission that that's also the kuli alma. Why don't we say that on the one hand the tree is providing shade, so that's partially what's growing it, but the soil is providing fertilization and that's providing nutrients, and that's mutter. So I think it has to be in the same category. That means that the thing that's also bahana together with the thing that's mutter bahana are both coming from in the same area. So when it's all the shade is coming from a tree, that's also that's fully also.
We said in the winter there's not an issue of shade.
Now, so my question is, if we're saying this is called zev goyim, when you have vegetables under a tree in the winter because the fertilizer coming from the leaves is
After.
and the nutrients from the ground are mutter. So why in the ratio of the Mishnah, when we said Lagabi during the Chama, you might say Chama it's also. Why would that be? That should be a machlekes. The Chachamim should say it's mutter. We're saying it's machlekes of Yossi and Rabbanan. The Yossi holds zev garim is also, and the Chacham say it's mutter. That's why they're arguing about the leaves falling
during
down.
During the summer, we have to have the soil. That's
right,
mutter.
it's getting nutrition from the soil. So that's what I'm trying to say is that I think it has to be in the same category. That the davar being gairim, that's mutter, together with the thing that's aser, are both in the same area. Then we say then there's a machlekes. But if they're in two separate areas, if it's a pure hana, you don't say that does this benefit from anything else somewhere else. It has to be in that same category. So remember the Rabbi Yossi our Mishnah seems to say, Rabbi Yossi disagrees with the Tanakama. He says that you can't grow your rockets with a fertilizer, even though it's also getting nutrition from other areas. See that if you have zeh, something aser and something mutter being gairim, it's aser. Rabban nami zeh is a gairim mutter. But we have exactly the opposite. We said earlier, we had this brisa earlier, that if you have something that's a metal avodah zara, you grind it up and you throw it into the wind or you throw it into the ocean. And they said back to Rabbi Yossi, you can't do that. The Torah asked benefiting from avodah zara. If you're going to throw it to the wind, it's going to land on the ground, and people are going to benefit from it. So the Rabbanan over there are saying zev gairim is aser. Rabbi Yossi is saying it's mutter, which is the opposite of our Mishnah. Kasha Rabbanan Rabbanan, Kasha Rabbi Yossi had Rabbi Yossi. So anyway, Bishlam Rabbi Yossi had Rabbi Yossi like Kasha Hasan Deka Azali Ibud Mat. Rabbi Yossi had Rabbi Yossi is not shver. In the case over there, where you're grinding up the avodah zara to destroy it, and Rashi explains this. It's a little bit hard to, the other Rishonim argue on Rashi. But Rashi said, let's see the Rashi. Hasan Gazali Ibud la'avdahu miskaven. When he grinds up the avodah zara, he's trying to destroy it. Batla avodas kechavim, and the avodas kechavim is bottled by grinding it up. It's not any different than the whole machlekes we had earlier about avodah zara that broke on its own, where we had a question of whether or not it's aser. For some reason, Rashi is assuming that that's enough of a reason, because there's one man the Amma before who said that something broke on its own is considered to be bottled, that this was already bottled from its shem avodas kechavim because it was ground up. We said the only reason why it's aser under those circumstances is a gzeira, because we're scared that maybe a yid's going to pick it up. Yeah. It's very hard to understand this Rashi because, again, that whole thing of bittul was talking about a guy doing it. And we're talking over here about a yid. So it sounds like this is what's telling to a bunch of things, that it was already destroyed, and we hold that something that broke on its own. So why is a yid destroying it any worse than broken? So we had to root him for that. So we're just stelling it all together and saying this is not such a chamadika thing, and therefore the chum would not be geyser on top of that. That it's you're being nana from Zevizek Goyim also. So this would be an exception, even though Zevizek Goyim might be as us over here, it would be mutter. So we have an answer for Rabbi Yossi that even though he holds generally Zevizek Goyim is mutter, over here we say it's in our Mishnah he says it's us. Al Rabbanan Kasha, but the Rabbanan it's the other way around. The Rabbanan say that they always hold Zevizek Goyim is us. The Gabi Seichik B'Zayrei L'Ruach. And now, why would they? How could they hold over here? It's mutter. So Gemara, Eipach. We have to say Nechanami. We'll switch around in our Mishnah and say Rabbi Yossi was the one who said that you can plant the vegetables under the tree the Asherah during the winter, and the Chacham argued and said it's also because you're nana when it fertilizes the ground. You always say Maloite. You don't switch it around. The Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi Kadeshaninan. So Rabbi Yossi will answer like we answered before. We said we had an answer Rabbi Yossi. It's Hailach Leibad, and that's more cool. The Rabbanon Kedamar Remari Breder of Kahana will answer the Rabbanon like Remari Breder of Kahana. Masha Mashbiach Ba'or Poigim Basa. This is it's really just a parallel. It's not an actual halacha that we're learning from there. It's talking about the din that a psulei hamakdashin has to have a certain level of kedusha. So when you skin such an animal that was sold, that was podoi, you're not allowed to be. There's a halacha that you can't skin it from its feet. It's a machlekes whether you could skin it from its feet because that's a more effective way of skinning it, but it does more damage to the meat. So the question is, when you're doing it this way, on the one hand, it's more of a bizayin for the meat, but on the other hand, you can get more money for the ar, which will then go to hektish, to bedek habayis. So the Gemara says basically, you win with one, you lose with the other. Either way, you're going to lose something. So the same thing over here. Hachanami masha mishbiach b'neviyah poigim b'tzel. The Gemara is saying that in our case, it's not just that being in the shade during the winter is not beneficial, but it's actually hurting the vegetables underneath it because they need as much sun as they can get in the winter. So even though you're saying that it benefits from the fertilizer, but it's also losing for the fact that it's in the shade. So you can't say he's benefiting, in that case, you can't say he's benefiting from the fertilizer because it's basically 50-50. It's whatever it's gaining, it's losing, and whatever it's losing, it's gaining. So it's not really a hana. Saktumara. Okay, so that's a machalik. A machalik in both of these things, both according to Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi, that our Mishnah is different. Really, Rabbi Yossi holds Zevizek Goyim is aser, but over here it's not really Zevizek Goyim. There's not really any benefit at all. Is it really true that Rabbi Yossi generally holds Zevizek Goyim is aser? But it's not. Rabbi Yossi, you can plant a branch of arla, but you can't plant a nut from arla. Meaning, arla is a tree. The fruit produced in the first 3 years of a tree are asa b'hana. Well, it's only asa the fruit, but the tree itself, the branches of the tree are not asa. So you can take a branch and plant it. It doesn't become. You haven't benefited from the fruit of the tree. You just benefit from the tree itself. But if you take a nut, the nut is considered a pre, and it's asa. It's asa to plant it. That if he went ahead and he planted a nut, or he hivrich is where you take the end of a branch and you stick it in the ground so it should take root and create a new tree, or hirkiv is where he grafted on a piece of one tree into another tree, that Rabbi Yossi says that that's mutter.
So what does it mean when we say? So you can plant when you say you can plant a branch, right? Is that also the same thing? You're grafting.
You're grafting when you plant the branch. It doesn't. It's saying different things. Um, when you take something from this tree, a branch from this tree, and you put it into another tree. Let me think about it a second.
I mean, I'm trying to figure out what 19 Yechir Shel Arlo is going on. What's going on? You're grafting something?
Which one? Which one of the three things?
The first thing, right? So Yossi Aimer, 19 Yechir Shel Arlo. Over there, is that also
Before
grafting?
Rabbi Huda said b'shem Rav, or that Rabbi
Yes,
Yossi is
yes,
Maida?
yes, yeah. In other words, what's going on over there? You're grafting as
Yeah.
well?
You can plant a branch. You haven't done anything wrong by planting a branch because that you didn't benefit from any fruit of Arlo. You just took a branch that you're allowed to benefit from. You made a new tree, that's fine. But you can't. But a nut is
You
considered
basically you
fruit.
had an Arlo tree, you took a branch from it and you grafted it, and then you're making a new tree. That's okay.
You plant it in the ground. Yeah,
All right. And when
that's
you're
fine.
planting a nut, meaning there's a nut
That's a
tree.
fruit. So now you have a new tree that you didn't have before using Arlo. That's
All
awesome.
right.
Okay, so those are that's that. Rav Moed Rabbi Yossi she'im nata, that if you went ahead and you planted the nut, which you shouldn't have done, right? We said because you benefited from the original tree, and now this nut grows and it produces a new new fruit. It means after 3 years, you can't have enough for whatever it produces for 3 years is arlo. But after that, it's mutter. Even though that egois was aser, but since it's not just the egois that's producing this tree, it's a zev zegorim. It has both the nut that is one of the sort of this zev zegorim. The way it goes in my mind is I think of it as like there's a mother and a father to this produce, and the mother one of them is aser and one of them is mutter. So this nut that you planted was aser, and the the soil that the nutrients that provided it were mutter. So since they together produce these produce, it becomes mutter. Now it doesn't take off that it still has a din arla. It's going to have arla for 3 years, but it's not forever also. And so the second case also is where um, you take a branch and you stick it in the ground. Um, it's still attached to the original tree, but it takes root also in the ground. So it has a din like a new tree. So after 3 years, it's going to be mutter, even though it was also benefiting from the original. I'm sorry. No, right. We're talking about, let's say it was 2 years after the first tree was planted, right? And you took a branch and you stuck it in the ground. Then you wait 1 more year. So at that point, the payros that this tree will produce are going to be mutter because the new tree is less than 3 years old, but the old tree is more than 3 years old. So that's going to be mutter. And the same thing with the last case where you're taking a branch and sticking into another tree, a similar case. So then it's going to be immediate. It's going to be also. It's going to be mutter right away because it's the new tree. Let's say is over 3 years old, so it immediately becomes mutter. It's again zev zegar. So in any case, the Tananami Hachi Maider Yosi on Namad Aleph Shem Nata v'Hivrech v'Hirchev mutter. So you see that he's saying zev zegar is mutter, which is not like we saw back on Amid Beis from the Bryce. We said that Lagabe Rabbi Yossi Ruach is he said over there it's also. I'm sorry, he said it right. Rabbi Yossi said it's also. V'chitema shani leil Rabbi Yossi bein shari sun la'avodas kechavim. And if you're going to say ein echanami, Rabbi Yossi generally holds zev as a goyim is mutter, but it's only legabe seichik g'zayra l'ruach, which is talking about avodas zara. There he's makbid on zev as a goyim. We found many times in many contexts that avodas zara is more chama than other things. Does he really make a distinction? If a field was fertilized with avodah zara, something from Baal Pa'ar, some Baal Pa'ar extras, or a cow that was fattened using animal feed from that was worshipped. Tani chada sada tizra paratish. One man, the Amr says, you can plant in that field after it was fertilized with avodah zara, and you can shech the para, because whatever comes out, whatever benefit you're going to have, is going to be zev gairim. It's going to be both the avodah zara together with the rest of the cow and together with the rest of the field. The tanidach taza sada tabor. The sada, you have to let basically the fertilizer expire, leave it for a year. Upara tirza, and the para you have to wait for it to get skinny till whatever it ate disappears. Ma'ilaf. So what's the machlekes? Ma'ilaf harab Yossi v'harabanan. The Manda Amar who says, so we were trying to be mechalik and say that Rabbi Yossi says really holds zev gairim is mutter, but only in the case of avodah zara he says it's also. But now we have to find the man who says even the gabi avodah zara that says it's mutter. So who's going to be the man over here who's saying it's mutter? L'chayr has to be Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara, no, doesn't have to be. Just because you don't know who this machlekes could be about, it doesn't mean it has to be Rabbi Yossi or Rabbanan. And I have another suggestion. Because you know Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan had a machlekes by legabi seichik v'zayir l'ruach, but we have another source for where there could be a machlekes. Har Rebbe Elazar v'har Rabbanan. Hi Rebbe Elazar Rabbanan. Who is the Rebbe Elazar Rabbanan? What do we say that they have a sheet legabi zev zegarim? Ilay Rebbe Elazar Rabbanan the sa'ar. Maybe you'll say it's the Rebbe Elazar Rabbanan legabi sa'ar, which I think I never knew this till the last couple of years. I think sa'ar is starter dough, right? They used to make sourdough. Isn't that starter? The starter, like they cultivate in a pot. No, I guess you guys don't know about this. You're not young and hip enough to know about sourdough. I think this is a big COVID thing to make a starter. Anyway, legabi sar, which is something used to make bread. The tanan sa'ar shel chulin v'shel truma. If you have a sa'ar, someone was making bread, and he took a little bit of this starter. It takes 2 ounces of starter to get the bread to rise. And he took 1 ounce of chulin and 1 ounce of truma. Shanav l'toicha isa, loy bezekadei lachmetz, v'loy bezekadei lachmetz, and it's starfu b'chimtzu. You put them together, and they will mechametz it. Rebbe Elazar aimer achar nani bo. Rebbe Elazar says, you go after the second one to put in, meaning if you put one after the other, it depends. If you put the chulin in first and then the sa'ar, we say the sa'ar, together with the chulin, made it into chametz. And therefore, normally, if you put something of this size, it would be bottled to the dough. But if it causes it to rise, that makes it more chashuv. So then it would make the whole thing truma, and you wouldn't be able to eat it. It would be aser for someone who's not a kohen. But he says whichever one, it depends whichever one comes second. That's the one who was the makkah apatish, and it makes it aser. The Rabbanan Chacham disagree, and they say no. It depends. You have to have enough sa'ir shel truma alone. There has to be 2 ounces of truma alone in order to make it chametz, in order that it shouldn't be bottled. And Abai explains the machlek. This machlekes between them is only where before the second one was put in, the truma, you put the truma in, and then you took out the truma and put in the chulin. You put in the 1 ounce of truma. It caused some rising to happen. Then you took out that ounce and you put another ounce of tur then it will be potter. Also. But if you put both of them together at the same time, then it would be also. So that's that which Rebbe Eliezer says that it's mutter if the heter came second is only because you took away the iser. But if it was still there, it would be also. So the Gemara is saying, so Abaye seems to be saying the reason is because the zev goyim will be mutter. If you have both the iser and the heter there at the same time, you say it's zev goyim mutter. So the Gemara, the time of the Rebbe Elazar could Abaye. How do you know the reason of Rebbe Elazar? It's like Abaye suggesting because he holds zev goyim. So this is l'chayra a kasha, right? Rebbe Elazar's. We see maybe this is the source for Rebbe Elazar that he holds zev goyim is asur. I'm sorry, is mutter. Dilma, time of the Belazar, Mishum the Achar not Anibo. Maybe it's not because of that. Maybe the reason is not like Avaya said that it's because you were Masalik it and that's what caused it you were Masalik this. And maybe it's whichever one came last. You look at it, that was the Makva Patish, that did the final cause of making it rise. Igam be Surah, Igam be Ater Mutar. Bein Salko, Bein Loy Salko, whether or not you took away the Isser before you put in the head. Elo, Rebbe Elazar Rabbanan the Eitzim. So we have to come with different source for where Rebbe Elazar and the Rabbanan, so we could get off the hook of saying Rabbi Yossi is the man the Amar who said over there that Zev Zegarim is mut. Elo, Rebbe Elazar Rabbanan the Eitzim the Tanan by Eitzim the Tanan. Not only men Eitzim, Asur Bahana. If you took from a Asherah wood, that wood is also bahana, right? It's Avoda Zara. Hisik boas satamur. If you fired up an oven with the wood from an Asherah, chodesh, if it's a new oven, so the firing up the oven finalizes the oven. It fires the oven and makes it work. Yutatz, he has to destroy the oven. Yoshan, yutzan. If it's a old oven, then he just has to wait for it to get cold before he can use it again, because it was already made into an oven from previous firings. This is just heating up the oven. As long as it's cold, he can use it to bake. Then he won't be nana from the eitzim. Asura bahana. If he baked either with a new tanner that was fired with eitzim, or an old oven that had heat from eitzim of an asherah, that passes asura because it's benefited from avodah zara. Misa'ara ba'cheirim kulin asura. So if it got mixed up with other bread, they're all asur ba'anot. It's each one is an individual thing. Rebbe Elazar said you don't have to. They're not all asur b'hana. There's a way out of it. You could be paida this bread by whatever hana you got from the eitzim, throw that into the Yam HaMelech, and there's a way to be paida the hana that you had from Avodah Zara, which is not something we've come across before. So this is machlokes l'gabe whether you could be paida. The Chachamim said that no, we're not paida l'avodas chacham. So the Gemara is suggesting, they both are agreeing that the bread that was baked in this tanur with avodah zara wood is going to be asur, even though it benefited both from the old oven that was there from before and the eitzim, which is avodah zara. It's zev goyim, and even so, they're saying it's asur. So the Gemara, but Rabbanan the P'tigalei de Elazar maniu. Who's the Rabbanan who are arguing on Rebbe Elazar? We're saying Rebbe Elazar, this is machlokes Rabbanan and Rebbe Eliezer. Who's being argued? Ilay Rabbanan the Eitzim. If you're saying it's the Rabbanan who argued on him by Eitzim, Achmuri Machmuri. They only argued Lagabi whether you could be paida, but they agreed that Zev Zegarim is also. Ela Rabbanan the Sa'ar. Elamai, you go back to the Rabbanan who argued Lagabi Sa'ar. Emi the Shamal Rabbanan the Mekili B'Sa'ar. V'Vayis Kechavim Mekili. They were makel over there Lagabi Sa'ar. Legabi truma, but how do we know that they're going to be makel even legabi avodas kechavim? Ela olam harabi yosi v'harabon. So you have to go back to our original pshat. We don't have a way to avoid. That the brisa that says that you can that the tree the I'm sorry the soda that that benefited from Avoda Zara fertilizer and the cow that was fattened from Avoda Zara, you're allowed to benefit from them, is like Rabbi Yossi, who holds that Zev Zegoyim is mutter, and the ones who aser is Rabbanan. And what about the Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah, where Rabbi Yossi said it's aser to keep a tree over the field, the Yerokus, because of the fertilizer. Rabbi Yossi says, I talk holds Zev Zegoyim is mutter in all cases, even in Lagabi Avodah Zarah. Which is a little bit of a strange lashon, and you see the Bach stells on it. He's saying, but you should at least not be chaylik on me. You have been chaylik on me. I hold that even b'yemois hachama, it's mutter to have a tree on top of it, because it's not just the tree that's benefiting; it's benefiting other things. I hold Zev Zegoyim is mutter. I think that's what he's saying. But at least be moed to me. You're not being consistent. You should aser, if you hold Zev Zegoyim aser, you should aser be Moisek Sham. Avi Ragim Moisek Sham Rabbanan. You should be moed to me, not moed to me, but you should concede that Moisek Sham it's also. Why would you say it's mutter? But Rabbanan could Amar Mary Breder of Kahana, and they would say like Mary Breder of Kahana that it's there's two sides to it. That even though it gets benefit from the fertilization, but it's hurting from the shade. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel Halacha Rabbi Yossi. Halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. Just to finish up, Hahu Gimsa des Davin Bezavin. There was a field that was fertilized by Avodah Chacham. Shalach Rav Amram Kamei de Rabbi Yosef. He asked what to do. Amalei Hachi Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel Halacha Rabbi Yossi. Halacha is like Rabbi Yossi that it is it's mutter. Okay. Shkoyach.
Thank you. Have a great Bach. Enjoy.